Hello, my name is Samantha Alonso, and my AP research was about the relationship between emphatic gestures and student engagement. In the teacher's role in student engagement, a review Pedler said, the teacher has the most significant opportunity to engage students by shaping their learning and motivation. By engaging students with the lesson being taught, they would be able to perform better, learn more, and overall take part in a more positive learning cycle. For my research, I defined student engagement using Frederick's definition for behavioral engagement. A student was engaged when they were on task. Emphatic gestures, in my research, are gestures that are used to emphasize what is being said and how, and it may show an emotional state like enthusiasm. Finding a gap. I used the articles School Engagement, Potential of the Concept, State of the Evidence by Fredericks to find definitions in past research for student engagement. Fredericks argued that student engagement is multidimensional and has cognitive, behavioral, and emotional engagement all combined form student engagement. But for my research, I couldn't look into emotional and cognitive because Frederick defined them as like having outputs from external areas outside the classroom, like participating in sports and stuff. The teacher's role in student engagement, a review by Pedler. I used it because it was saying how teachers had an influence on students' engagement, and it provided teachers with a few strategies to use to encourage engagement in the classroom. Peterson's article, The Complementary Effect of Empathy and Nonverbal Communication Training on Persuasion Capabilities, is what I used. It was an article that conducted a study where college students were taught or were given a presentation class, and they used empathy and nonverbal communication to see if people would perceive students from these classes as more persuasive than the regular presentation class. Because of this article, I learned more about emphatic gestures and decided to use it for my research. So I wanted to use emphatic gestures and see if it could cause an increase in student engagement because there was no research on it. There was a few articles on student engagement and descriptive gestures, but nothing on emphatic. That led me to my research question: what is the relationship between emphatic gestures and student engagement? My hypothesis was that a positive relationship exists between emphatic gestures and student engagement. So an increase in emphatic gestures would cause an increase in student engagement. For my research, I did an observational correlational study. I emailed the teachers and asked them if it would be okay to observe their classrooms. In the email, I gave them the purpose of the research and I defined what emphatic gestures were. When the dates were set, I went in on day one. I didn't tell the teachers to do anything specific, told them to give their regular lecture, and I just observed the teacher, saw if they were using any gestures at all. And I was looking at the students to see if they were on task. For some classes, this was like taking notes. For others, it was reading along with the teacher. On day two, I spoke with the teachers before the class and asked them to use emphatic gestures and reminded them of the definition. So this was my observational sheet. For the on-task behaviors, like I said, it was following along with the teachers, taking notes, asking questions. I used Ellen Grenard's off-task behavior criteria from her effects of color and light on selected elementary students. And so for her, it was like not following along with the lessons, playing with objects, daydreaming, being out of their seats, stuff like that. For the math class that I observed, there wasn't a big difference. On the first day of observation, there were 21 students and 14 students were on task, while 7 students were off. The next day, there were 19 students and 14 students were on task and 5 were off task. So the number didn't increase and the amount of students that were on task, and due to absences, there was less people off task. For the English class, there was 24 students on the first day, and there was 16 students on task, and 8 students off task. On the second day, there were 15 students on task and 10 students off task. 6 students off task. Again, there wasn't a big difference. There was absences again, and the number of students on task decreased. For the history class, there were 15 students on task on the first day out of 25, and there were 10 students off task. On the second day, there were 26 students, and 17 were on task and 9 were off. So for this class, there was actually an increase in students that were on task and a decrease in students off task. There was also more students the second day than the first day. My results. I found that there was no relationship between emphatic gestures and student engagement, proving my hypotheses wrong. I believe that the changes could have just been coincidental, really, due to what the classes were doing or absences and stuff, not really because of the use of emphatic gestures. Every classroom was different. The English classroom was reading a book and answering questions. The math classroom was a lesson on geometry, and the history classroom was more independent work. So there wasn't a lot of lecture. The limitations to my studies, one of them was time and no recording. I wasn't given permission to record students or inside the classroom. So that means I had to go in and observe the teachers and the class by myself. So my attention wasn't always on the teacher or always on the students. So I didn't catch everything, and I couldn't look back to see if I had missed anything. The absences, some students were present the first day and absent the second, or absent the first and present the next. I also studied different subjects, which I think could have caused a difference, just because I noticed that when I observed my math class, there wasn't a lot that he could use emphatic gestures for. He tried to, but he wasn't able to, and the times that he was able to use gestures, it was more when he was talking with the students about personal stuff. It wasn't having to do with the math. I did have to exclude one observation. I observed the science classroom, but there was an error in the time on our schedules, and we weren't able to meet up for the same class on the second day of observation. So I couldn't see if there was an increase or a decrease in her classroom. But even then, when I did observe her class, she used a lot of descriptive gestures, not emphatic, just to describe what she was talking about then. In future directions, I think it would be easier for people, if they were to conduct the study again, to just focus on one. Maybe just the English classroom or maybe a different history. The history classroom that I observed, the teacher told me from the beginning he doesn't give a lot of lecture. it's like 15 to 10 minutes, and then everything else is independent work. In the English classroom, I was observing her reading a book with the classroom. So many of her emphatic gestures were when she was talking about the book and what was going on in it. Or they could observe for a longer period of time. Maybe if I had done an observation with checking, like having one classroom use emphatic gestures maybe for a month, and then another classroom not use emphatic gestures, maybe I would have seen a bigger difference, but I didn't. I didn't observe for that long, so that's something someone else could take and do something more with. And these are my sources.
Samantha, thank you so much. All right, oral defense panel, question number 1. Samantha, how did the choices you made when designing or implementing your research method impact your research process?
Initially, like I said, I wanted to do recording, and I was not given permission. So when I was collecting data, I did find it a little difficult to try and focus on just the teacher or just look at the students to see if they were on task, because the teachers interact with the students as well. So if the teacher was gesturing or talking with the student, I would be looking at her and I couldn't see how it affected the student, if they were being distracted or if they were being put on task as well as the other students.
How do your findings provide directions for future research and calculation?
Like I said, I found no correlation between them, but I feel like the people can still try to do this again, like I said, for a longer period of time, or just focus on one subject. The results that I found doesn't mean that teachers shouldn't use emphatic gestures. It just means that I didn't see any increase in student engagement. So I think it's up to the teachers how they would want to increase the engagement in their classroom, and maybe future studies could see if there is an effect long term.
What was the most important research skill that you developed as a result of this process, and how might you apply it in your future endeavor?
For me, it was probably perseverance and presentation. I get very nervous with presentations, but this has helped me a lot. And then with the perseverance, I realized through this process that there are like a lot of bumps, but if you keep going, everything turns out well in the end. So I really enjoyed this class, and I thought that it's really going to benefit me in the future, even just getting a little bit more practice presenting in front of an audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm actually going to have you stay there just a minute, Samantha. The floor is open for general questions, guys, if you have them.
I think just in general, so just so I know, like if I'm talking about a plot chart and I'm using my gestures to go around, like we've got rising action and I do that's just demonstrative, right? Like I don't remember the exact terminology, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's, I don't know if that's just an English thing, but like when it's like, you know, demonstrative pronouns or whatever, yeah. But that's not what, so an example of an empathetic gesture would be, like if I place my hand, like if I'm having a conversation with Miss McNabb and
Yeah, it's more
do
like
something like that,
demonstrating an emotional state.
Right, yeah.
That's why it was more difficult with math and science courses.
Right, because they're not going to be like,
Yeah.
Pythagorean theorem, hard. I mean,
science is attraction.
I mean, yeah. So okay, I was just curious. Okay.
So did you do just like classes in high school, or did you do like younger levels too?
No, this is just in high school standard classes. I don't think I would have been able to go up to the middle school or something to observe them.
I'm curious, I feel like a hypothesis I would have is that teachers of younger children need to use more gestures to keep children like involved.
Yeah, maybe it could be looked at until like pre-K and kindergarten students when they're still like developing and stuff. Rachel?
Do you think there could be a correlation between when there was an increase in absences and a decrease in all tasks?
Maybe for the English classroom, I remember specifically the people that were mainly off task that day on the first day, like a few of them were absent the next day, and some more other students were present, and it was a calmer environment. So it could be due to absences as well.
Yeah, an absence can change the whole class dynamic.
John?
Do you think that there's a correlation of what has happened in that time period? Because I know like a lot of times what's become like the buzz that goes around what everyone wants to talk about and how urgent it is to talk about. Is there a correlation between that and focusing as well, or is that something that needs to be researched?
I feel like that might need to be researched. When I was observing, I was also listening to some of the students that were talking, but none of them seemed to be talking about trends or rumors or anything. It was just them talking to other students about their day or something.
Any other questions?